The fleet descended upon Earth, confident in their victory. Millions of eyes across the galaxy were fixed on the planet, especially those in the council chambers, expecting a swift conquest. But what unfolded was far from what anyone anticipated. Humanity did not cower. They did not beg. They rose with unmatched fury, turning the invaders' triumph into a nightmare. And as the council watched in horror, the galaxy finally understood. Attacking Earth was the gravest mistake anyone could make. The arrogance of stars, the galactic assembly hall floated in the void between star systems. A massive structure of crystalline metal that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic politics. Inside its vast chamber, representatives from 2847. Different species gathered in a semicircular arrangement that stretched for 2 kilometers. Today's session was routine, or so everyone thought. The agenda listed standard items, trade disputes, territorial claims, and the usual expansion proposals that came before the council every cycle. Commander Rexter of the Corthany Empire stood. At the presentation platform, his scaled form towering at nearly 4 meters tall. His species had evolved from apex predators on a high-gravity world, and it showed in every line of his muscular frame. The Corthany had built their empire through strength and cunning, claiming 37 star systems over the past 2 centuries. They were respected, feared, and rarely questioned when they announced their intentions to expand. The holographic display behind Vexter showed a blue and green planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. White clouds swirled across its surface, covering vast oceans and 7 major landmasses. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. The data scrolling beside the image told a different story. The planet was designated as Survey Target 4721, located in a yellow star system on the outer edge of the explored galaxy. Its inhabitants called it Earth. Vexter's voice rumbled through the translation systems, reaching every ear, tendril, and sensory organ in the vast hall. The planet before you is inhabited by a species that calls itself humanity. Our survey teams have completed a comprehensive analysis over the past 6 standard cycles. The findings are conclusive. This world represents a prime opportunity for integration into the Corthany Empire. He paused for effect, his amber eyes scanning the assembled representatives. They are primitive, divided into nearly 200 separate nation-states that war with each other over resources and ideology. Their technology level is centuries behind galactic standards. They have not achieved faster-than-light travel. They have not unified their world under a single government. They are, in every measurable way, perfect candidates for supervised development under Corthany guidance. The holographic display shifted to show human cities, their buildings reaching toward the sky, but constructed from simple materials like steel and concrete. It showed their military forces armed with chemical propellant weapons and crude explosive devices. It showed their space program, barely capable of reaching their own moon with primitive rocket technology. To the assembled representatives, humanity looked exactly as Vexter described them, primitive, weak, and ripe for conquest. Representative. Tulos of the Merchant Collective spoke first, his synthetic voice unit translating his pheromone-based language into standard galactic speech. What is the projected resource yield from this integration? The Corthany have claimed many worlds in recent cycles. How does this one justify the expedition cost? It was a practical question, the kind that dominated most council sessions. Resources were the currency of galactic power, and every expansion had to prove its worth. Vexter touched a control on his wrist device, and new data flooded the display. The planet possesses abundant rare metals, particularly in its continental plates. Water covers 70% of its surface, making it ideal for agricultural development. Most importantly, the human population numbers nearly 8 billion individuals. After integration, they will provide a substantial labor force for our industrial operations. The projections show a return on investment within 40 standard years. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the harvest of an empty asteroid field rather than the conquest of a living world. Murmurs spread through the assembly. Some representatives nodded in approval, recognizing the economic logic. Others remained silent, their moral calculations hidden behind alien expressions. The Galactic Assembly had long ago accepted that expansion was a natural right of strong civilizations. Weaker species were integrated, protected, and guided by their conquerors. It was not called slavery because the conquered were given food, shelter, and purpose. It was called supervised development, and it had happened to hundreds of worlds throughout galactic history. From her seat in the ancient observer section, elder diplomat Seren stirred. She was old even by the standards of her species, the Luminae, who could live for millennia. Her translucent skin glowed with a soft blue light, and her large eyes held the wisdom of ages. She had seen empires rise and fall, watched species extinct themselves through arrogance, and witnessed the birth of civilizations that would one day rule the stars. She had also read the old records, the ones most species had forgotten or dismissed as legend. Saren activated her speaking privilege, and a chime echoed through the hall. The assembled representatives fell silent out of respect for her age and status. Commander Vexler, she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. Have your survey teams studied the evolutionary history of this species? Have they examined how these humans came to dominate their world? Her question was gentle, but pointed, and something in her tone made several nearby representatives shift uncomfortably. The Vexler's expression showed mild irritation at the interruption. Our teams have gathered sufficient data for operational planning, Elder. The humans evolved from arboreal primates on a relatively stable world. They developed tool use, agriculture, and civilization following standard evolutionary patterns. There's nothing unusual about their development that would concern our integration protocols. He clearly considered the question answered and wanted to move on to the vote. But Seren did not sit down. She remained standing, her glow intensifying slightly as she drew upon old memories. I have lived long enough to see patterns that younger species miss, Commander. 15,000 years ago, my people encountered another species from what they called a death world. That world had predators, diseases, and climate extremes that should have prevented the evolution of intelligence. Yet intelligence emerged anyway, forged by constant pressure to adapt or die. She paused, letting her words sink in. Those creatures were not the strongest we had encountered. They were not the most technologically advanced. But they possessed something we had never seen before, an absolute refusal to accept defeat. They would rather die than surrender, and they taught us a terrible lesson about the difference between strength and determination. The hall had grown very quiet. Saren's story was unfamiliar to most of the younger species, but the older representatives knew the tale. The species she spoke of had been contacted by the Luminae exploration fleet with an offer of peaceful integration. They had refused. War had followed, a war the Luminae had expected to win within months. Instead, it had lasted for 17 years and cost the Luminae dearly. The enemy had learned, adapted, and evolved their technology at a frightening pace. By the time peace was finally negotiated, they had become a galactic power in their own right. And the Luminae had learned never to underestimate persistence. Vexther's scales rippled with what might have been amusement or annoyance. With respect, Elder, ancient history has little bearing on current operations. The species you speak of had advanced biotechnology and natural advantages. These humans have neither. They are soft-bodied, slow to reproduce, and lack any natural weapons. Our preliminary combat simulations show a 97% success rate for the integration operation. He gestured at the display again, where human soldiers were shown training with their primitive weapons. Look at them, Elder. They fight with metal tubes that use explosive chemical reactions to propel small projectiles. They protect themselves with woven fabric and thin metal plates. They are children playing at war. Seren looked at the images. For a long moment, studying the faces of the human soldiers, she saw something in their eyes that Vexter had missed, something the combat simulations could not measure. She saw the look of creatures who had clawed their way to the top of a brutal evolutionary ladder. who had survived ice ages and plagues, and predators that would have destroyed softer species. She saw persistent hunters, the most terrifying type of predator in the galaxy, the kind that never stopped, never gave up, never accepted that prey could escape. I hope you are right, Commander, Soren said quietly as she finally sat down. I truly hope you are right. But mark my words, the galaxy may come to regret this day. When you poke a sleeping predator, you should not be surprised when it wakes up angry. The vote was called. Of the 2,847 representatives present, 2,103 voted in favor of the Kortheni integration proposal. Only 98 voted against, mostly elder species who remembered old lessons about underestimating enemies. The remaining representatives abstained, unwilling to oppose the Kortheni, but uncomfortable with the decision. The motion passed overwhelmingly, and Commander Vexter accepted the Council's blessing with barely concealed triumph. Within hours, the Kortheni war fleet began preparations for departure. 150 warships, each capable of destroying a city with a single salvo, powered up their engines and plotted a course for the small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. The crews were confident, the commanders were eager, and the Empire expected a quick and profitable conquest. They had done this dozens of times before. They knew how it would end. On Earth, humanity remained blissfully unaware of the doom that was traveling toward them at faster-than-light speed. People went about their daily lives, fighting their small wars, pursuing their petty conflicts, and never looking up at the stars with anything but wonder and hope. They did not know that their entire existence was about to change, that they were about to face a test unlike anything in their history. They did not know that the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. The Kortheni fleet jumped into hyperspace, and the countdown to first contact began. Behind them, in the ancient observer section of the Galactic Assembly, Elder Soren watched the stars and remembered old warnings from forgotten archives. One phrase kept echoing in her mind, a warning written by explorers who had visited Earth thousands of years ago and chosen to leave humanity alone. The report had been filed away and forgotten by everyone except the oldest species, but Soren remembered it now with perfect clarity. The warning had been simple and clear. They are persistent hunters. They do not know how to stop. If you engage them, be prepared for a war that will last until one side is extinct. They will learn from every mistake, adapt to every strategy, and turn your own weapons against you. They are not the strongest species we have encountered, but they may be the most dangerous. Recommendation: avoid contact and allow them to develop naturally. In time, they will reach the stars on their own. Pray they come as friends, because they would make terrible enemies. The report had been written 6,000 years ago by a Lumine science team. It had been ignored then, dismissed as the paranoid observations of researchers who had spent too long in isolation. Now, as the Kortheni fleet raced toward Earth, Soren wondered if anyone would remember that warning before it was too late. She suspected they would not, and that thought filled her with a deep and ancient sorrow. The galaxy was about to wake a sleeping monster, and there would be no putting it back to sleep once it opened its eyes. In the void between stars, the Kortheni warships flew onward, carrying soldiers who dreamed of easy glory and commanders who expected quick victory. None of them knew what was waiting for them on the small blue planet. None of them understood that they were not going to conquer prey. They were about to discover why humans had become the apex predators of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years, and why nothing in that world had ever succeeded. The awakening Kortheni fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the solar system in a coordinated display of military precision. 150 warships materialized simultaneously, their hulls painted in the deep crimson that marked the vessels of the Empire. Commander Vexter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, and watched as Earth appeared on his tactical display. The planet looked even more vulnerable than the survey data had suggested. No orbital defense platforms, no weapons satellites, Nothing but a handful of primitive space stations that could barely maintain stable orbit. The communications officer turned toward Vexter with barely contained excitement. Commander, we are detecting thousands of electromagnetic transmissions from the planet's surface. Radio waves, television broadcasts, internet data streams. They have no idea we are here. Their detection technology is too primitive to see us at this distance. The officer's scales rippled with amusement. They are still broadcasting entertainment programs and news reports about their own internal conflicts. Shall I begin jamming their communications? Vexter considered the question for a moment before shaking his head. No, let them communicate freely for now. I want them to see what is about to happen. I want their leaders to understand the futility of resistance. Broadcast our standard integration message on all their frequencies. Make sure every government, every military installation, and every civilian population center receives it simultaneously. He settled into his command chair with satisfaction. This conquest would be over before the galactic news networks even reported it had begun. The message that reached Earth 17 minutes later was translated into every human language simultaneously. It appeared on television screens, computer monitors, and mobile devices across the planet. Military command centers received it through their secure channels. World leaders heard it interrupt their private communications. Radio stations found their broadcasts replaced with the alien transmission. The message was clear, direct, and devastating. People of Earth, your planet has been selected for integration into the Korthani Empire. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. Your primitive civilization will be absorbed into our advanced society, where you will serve productive roles under our guidance. Resistance is pointless. Your weapons cannot harm our ships. Your militaries cannot challenge our forces. Surrender immediately and casualties will be minimized. You have one planetary rotation to comply. Failure to surrender will result in orbital bombardment of your major population centers until compliance is achieved. For exactly 7 seconds, the entire planet fell silent. People stared at their screens in disbelief, trying to process the impossible message they had just received. Then chaos erupted. Emergency hotlines were overwhelmed with calls. Governments scrambled to verify the authenticity of the transmission. Military forces went to maximum alert. Religious leaders tried to calm panicking populations. Scientists trained their telescopes on the coordinates the aliens had provided and confirmed what everyone feared. The threat was real. 150 massive warships were positioned just beyond Mars, and they were moving closer. In Geneva. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened within minutes. Representatives from every nation crowded into the chamber, abandoning decades of careful diplomatic protocol in the face of existential threat. The Secretary General, a calm woman named Dr. Amara Okonkwo, called the session to order despite the chaos. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. We have confirmed the presence of hostile alien vessels in our solar system. Every space-capable nation has verified the threat independently. The message we received was not a hoax. We are facing an invasion by a technologically superior force. She paused, letting that terrible reality sink in. We have approximately 18 hours before their deadline expires. We need to make a decision as a species. Do we surrender as they demand, or do we resist? The chamber erupted in arguments. Some representatives advocated immediate surrender, citing the technological disparity and the need to preserve human life. Others demanded resistance, refusing to accept slavery under alien rule. The debate raged for 3 hours, voices rising in anger and fear, until an unexpected voice cut through the chaos. General James Kowalski, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces, stood at his seat and spoke with quiet authority that somehow carried across the chamber. I have spent 40 years studying human military history. I have read about every major war, every significant battle, every moment when our species faced seemingly impossible odds. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had stopped arguing to listen. We have a pattern. When faced with extinction, when confronted with enemies who should defeat us, we do something that defies all logic. We fight anyway. We adapt. We learn. We survive. The Spartans at Thermopylae knew they could not win, but they fought. The British at Dunkirk faced annihilation, but they evacuated. The Soviets at Stalingrad should have been crushed, but they held. We are persistence hunters, ladies and gentlemen. It is coded into our DNA. We do not accept defeat because our ancestors never learned how Dr. Okungo called for a vote. The result was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 173 nations voted to resist. 42 voted to surrender. The remaining nations abstained, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Humanity, for the first time in its history, had made a collective decision as a species. They would not go quietly into slavery. They would fight, even knowing they could not win. The response transmitted to the Korthany fleet 18 hours later was brief. Commander Vexter read it twice, unable to believe what his translator was showing him. The message consisted of only 2 words. Come try. Vexter, disbelief turned to rage. These primitives dared to refuse? These creatures who could barely reach their own moon thought they could challenge the Korthany Empire. He would teach them the price of defiance. He gave the order his empire had given dozens of times before, begin the bombardment. The first plasma strikes hit Earth's atmosphere at dawn on what would become known as Liberation Day. The Korthany targeted major population centers as promised, intending to break human will with overwhelming displays of force. New York City was first, its skyscrapers collapsing as superheated energy boiled the ground beneath them. Tokyo followed, then London, then Mumbai. Within the first hour, 23 major cities were struck, and nearly 15 million humans died. Smoke and ash began to block out the sun across entire continents. But something unexpected happened in those first terrible hours. Humanity did not break. Instead, something ancient and primal awakened in the human psyche, something that had been dormant during centuries of relative peace and prosperity. The survival instinct that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and predators roared back to life with terrible clarity. Grief and fear transformed into cold, calculated rage. Military forces around the world launched everything they had at the Korthany fleet. Nuclear missiles, conventional warheads, experimental weapons that had never been tested in combat. All of it rose from silos and submarines and mobile platforms. The Korthany point defense systems destroyed 98% of the incoming fire, their automated weapons tracking and eliminating threats with casual efficiency. But 2% got through, and in war, 2% can matter. The first human weapon to strike a Korthany vessel was a Russian ICBM that had been retrofitted with a more powerful warhead. It hit a destroyer-class ship on the fleet's outer perimeter, and the nuclear explosion breached the vessel's shield for exactly 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, the radiation and electromagnetic pulse fried the ship's internal systems. The destroyer went dark, powerless and drifting. 30 seconds later, a second missile struck the same ship, and this time there were no shields to stop it. The destroyer broke apart in a brilliant flash of atomic fire. On the bridge of the Crimson Talon, alarms began sounding. Vexter stared at his tactical display in disbelief as the destroyer's signature vanished from the screen. "Impossible," he whispered. "Their weapons should not be able to penetrate our shields." His tactical officer was frantically reviewing sensor data, his scales turning pale with shock. "Commander, the electromagnetic pulse from their primitive nuclear weapons is interfering with our shield harmonics. The technology is so crude that our systems are not designed to filter it. They are using their technological backwardness as a weapon." Before Vexter could respond, 3 more ships reported shield failures. 2 cruisers and a supply vessel were hit by nuclear strikes in rapid succession. The supply vessel exploded, taking 2 nearby fighters with it in the blast. The Korthany fleet which had expected to conduct a one-sided bombardment against helpless targets, suddenly found itself under attack from an enemy that should not have been able to touch them. On Earth, something remarkable was happening in the chaos and destruction. A young aerospace engineer named Dr. Sarah Chen had been working at a research facility in California when the invasion began. The facility had been struck in the second wave of bombardment, and she had barely escaped with her life. Now, hiding in the ruins with a team of scientists and military personnel, she was doing something that would change the course of the war. The team had recovered fragments of a Corthany fighter that had been shot down by ground-based missiles. The wreckage was still hot. The alien technology partially melted and fused, but Sarah recognized something in the design. The shield generators operated on principles similar to theoretical models human scientists had been developing for decades. The Corthany had perfected the technology, but the underlying physics were universal. And if the physics were universal, then the technology could be understood, replicated, and eventually improved. Sarah worked for 72 hours without sleep, surviving on coffee and adrenaline and pure determination. Her team dissected the alien shield generator piece by piece, mapping its circuits and analyzing its power systems. They did not have time for careful scientific method or peer review. They had only desperation and genius and the knowledge that millions of people were dying while they worked. On the third day, Sarah activated the first human-built energy shield. It lasted for only 8 seconds before overloading and burning out, but those 8 seconds proved that humanity could learn, could adapt, could take enemy technology and make it their own. The data was transmitted to research facilities around the world. Through underground networks that had survived the bombardment, engineers in surviving nations began building their own versions of the shield generators. The designs were crude, unstable, and prone to catastrophic failure, but they worked. Within 2 weeks of the invasion, human soldiers began appearing on battlefields with portable energy shields. Cobbled together from alien wreckage and human ingenuity, the Corthany ground forces had landed, expecting easy occupation of a broken population. Instead, they found themselves fighting in the ruins of cities against an enemy that learned from every encounter. Human soldiers studied Corthany tactics, identified weaknesses in their armor, and developed new strategies specifically designed to counter superior technology. They used the rubble of destroyed buildings as cover, turned the Corthany's own weapons against them, and fought with a ferocity that shocked and terrified the alien invaders. Commander Vexter received casualty reports that made his blood run cold. In the first month of combat, the Corthany had lost 12 ships and over 30,000 ground troops. That was more casualties than they had suffered in their previous 5 conquests combined. The humans were supposed to be primitive and weak, but they fought like demons. They refused to retreat even when defeat was certain. They turned every street into a trap, every building into a fortress, and every civilian into a potential combatant. Worst of all, they were learning. The Corthany had expected to fight the same enemy throughout the campaign, but humanity evolved with terrifying speed. Tactics that worked in the first week became useless by the second. Weapons that had been effective became obsolete as humans developed countermeasures. The Corthany were discovering a terrible truth about their enemy. Humans were not just survivors. They were adapters. And they were adapting faster than any species the Corthany had ever encountered in orbit above the burning planet. Vexter made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. He increased the intensity of the orbital bombardment, targeting not just military installations, but any infrastructure that could support human resistance. Power plants, water treatment facilities, agricultural centers, all of it burned under plasma fire. He convinced himself that he was being merciful, that a quick and brutal assault would end the war faster and save lives in the long run. But as he watched the planet burn below him, as he read reports of his soldiers dying in growing numbers, as he witnessed humanity's absolute refusal to surrender despite facing extinction, Commander Vexter began to understand that Elder Suren had been right. The Courtney had not invaded a primitive species. They had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had survived millions of years on a hostile world by refusing to die. And now that monster was awake, and it was very, very angry. The price of hubris 6 months after the invasion began. The Courtney Empire controlled less than 30% of Earth's surface, and even that control was nominal at best. Commander Vexter stood on the bridge of the Crimson Talon and stared at casualty reports that should have been impossible. His fleet had been reduced to 91 operational warships. Over 100,000 Courtney soldiers were dead or missing. Supply lines were under constant attack. And the humans showed no sign of weakening, what made the situation truly terrifying was not just that humanity was fighting back, but how quickly they were evolving. The primitive species that could barely reach their own moon 6 months ago was now manufacturing plasma rifles in hidden factories. They had cracked the basics of energy shield technology and were improving the designs faster than Courtney engineers could develop countermeasures. Human fighter pilots flew captured alien craft with skill that matched veteran Courtney warriors. It was as if the entire species had compressed centuries of technological advancement into half a year through sheer desperation and determination. The tactical officer approached Vexter with another grim report. Commander, we have lost contact with the occupation force and the region they call Australia. 1,500 soldiers, completely silent for the past 12 hours. The last transmission reported human insurgents using coordinated plasma weapons and some kind of new explosive device. His voice dropped lower. Sir, the humans are calling it Operation Broken Chain. Intelligence suggests they are planning a coordinated global offensive. Vexter felt something he had never experienced in 40 years of military service. Genuine fear. The humans had proven time and again that they did not think like other species. They did not calculate odds or accept logical outcomes. When cornered, they became more dangerous, not less. When faced with extinction, they fought harder instead of surrendering. It was madness, beautiful and terrible madness that defied every principle of rational warfare. Deep beneath the ruins of what had once been Geneva, in a bunker that had survived, 3 direct orbital strikes. The surviving leaders of humanity gathered for what they knew might be their final strategic session. Dr. Amara Okonkwo presided over the meeting, her face showing the exhaustion of 6 months spent coordinating global resistance. Beside her sat General Kowalski, now commanding what remained of Earth's unified military forces. Around the table were representatives from every surviving nation, military commanders, scientists, and engineers who had kept humanity fighting when victory seemed impossible. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before a holographic display showing the Courtney fleet's current positions. Her hair had gone partially gray from stress, and her hands bore scars from working with unstable alien technology, but her eyes burned with fierce intelligence. She had become humanity's leading expert on Courtney technology through the simple expedient of studying every piece of wreckage her teams could recover. We have one chance. Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to propose. We have been building toward this for 3 months. Every captured ship, every salvaged weapon, every piece of alien technology we have reverse engineered has been leading to this moment. Operation Broken Chain is not about winning a conventional war. It is about showing the galaxy that humanity cannot be conquered. She manipulated the holographic display, showing flight paths and attack vectors. We are going to hit them with everything we have, all at once, everywhere simultaneously, General. Kowalski took over the briefing, his weathered face set in grim determination. Every nation with operational aircraft will launch their entire inventory at the Courtney fleet. Every missile, every experimental weapon, every jury-rigged alien craft we have managed to get flying. The display showed thousands of attack vectors converging on the Courtney positions. Most of these aircraft will not return. Most of our pilots know they are on a one-way mission. But if we can break through their defenses, if we can get close enough, we can board their ships. A Chinese admiral named Li Zhao spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lost her entire family in the first bombardment. My submarine fleet has been secretly modified with salvaged Corthany propulsion systems. We can reach orbit. It will take everything our reactors can produce, and the crews will experience lethal radiation exposure during the ascent. But we can deliver boarding parties to their capital ships. She paused, meeting the eyes of everyone in the room. My sailors have volunteered. All of them. They know what this means. The Russian delegate, a grizzled general named Dmitry Volkov, nodded in agreement. Our cosmonauts have been training and captured Corthany fighters. We have 37 operational craft and 90 pilots who qualify for the mission. He smiled grimly. The odds are not in our favor, but when have humans ever cared about odds? We go where we must go. We do what must be done. Dr. Okonkwo looked around the table at the assembled representatives of a species that refused to die. She thought about the billions who had perished in the invasion, the cities reduced to ash, the children who would never grow up, and the future that had been stolen from humanity. Then she thought about the determination in every face around her, the absolute refusal to accept defeat that had carried humanity through every extinction event and disaster their planet had thrown at them. We vote, she said simply. All in favor of Operation Broken Chain? Every hand rose. There were no abstentions this time, no voices of dissent. Humanity had made its choice 6 months ago when they decided to resist, and they would see that choice through to its conclusion, whatever that might be. Then let it be recorded that on this day, humanity chose to fight for its freedom or die trying. Signal all forces. Operation Broken Chain begins at dawn, halfway across the solar system. In the observer section of the Galactic Assembly's monitoring station, Elder Seren watched the data streams with ancient eyes that had seen this pattern before. She had been monitoring the Earth invasion since it began, watching humanity's impossible resistance with a mixture of sorrow and awe. She knew what was about to happen because she had studied human history during the long months of war. She understood their nature in a way the Corthany never would. A young communications officer approached her station, his bioluminescent skin flickering with anxiety. Elder Seren, we are detecting massive energy buildups across Earth's surface. Every surviving military installation is powering up simultaneously. The humans appear to be launching a full-scale offensive. Should we alert the Corthany command? Seren looked at the young officer with eyes that held 10,000 years of memory. The Corthany were warned 6 months ago. They chose not to listen. Now they will learn the lesson that my people learned long ago. She turned back to her displays. Do not interrupt what is about to happen. The galaxy needs to witness this. Dawn broke over Earth's ravaged surface, and with it came the fury of a species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction and chose to push back. From hidden bases on every continent, from underground bunkers that had survived months of bombardment, from mobile platforms that had stayed one step ahead of Corthany hunters. Humanity launched everything it had built, stolen, or improvised during 6 months of desperate warfare. Thousands of aircraft rose into the sky. Conventional jets flew alongside captured Corthany fighters. Experimental craft built from salvaged alien technology mixed with modified civilian aircraft loaded with explosives. Nuclear missiles launched from surviving silos, joined by plasma-tipped weapons that humanity had learned to manufacture in secret factories. Submarines broke through the ocean surface, their hulls modified with alien propulsion systems, racing toward space on columns of stolen fire. The Corthany fleet's sensors went insane trying to track the sheer volume of incoming threats. Commander Vexter watched his tactical display fill with red warning icons and felt his heart sink. This was not a military offensive. This was extinction-level desperation translated into violence. The humans were not trying to win. They were trying to take the Corthany Empire down with them. Point defense systems across the fleet engaged automatically, filling space with plasma fire and particle beams. Human aircraft died by the hundreds, exploding in brilliant flashes as alien weapons found their marks. Missiles were intercepted and destroyed before they could reach their targets. The Corthany defenses were working exactly as designed, eliminating 95% of incoming threats with brutal efficiency. But 5% of thousands is still a significant number, and the humans had learned to exploit every weakness in Corthany technology. Missiles programmed with evasive patterns based on 6 months of combat data weaved through defensive fire. Aircraft used the debris of destroyed craft as shields, hiding in expanding clouds of wreckage until they were close enough to strike. And when the weapons failed, the pilots did not turn back. They flew their aircraft directly into Corthany, ships turning themselves into guided missiles that no defense system could stop. The first ship to fall was a cruiser-class vessel on the fleet's outer perimeter. A modified Russian submarine, its hull glowing white-hot from the strain of reaching orbit, crashed through the cruiser's weakened shields and buried itself in the ship's reactor core. The resulting explosion tore the cruiser apart from the inside, sending debris cascading into nearby vessels. Sarah Chun piloted a captured Corthany fighter through the chaos. Her hands steady on controls she had learned to operate through trial and desperate error. Behind her sat 3 Marines in salvaged armor, weapons charged and ready for boarding action. She had volunteered to lead one of the assault teams because no one knew alien technology better than she did, and because she had lost everyone she loved in the invasion. She had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Her fighter dodged through a storm of defensive fire, using every trick she had learned from studying Corthany flight patterns. She lost her left wing to a plasma burst, but kept flying, compensating with attitude thrusters and sheer willpower. When her shields failed, she pushed the fighter harder, racing against death toward the massive form of the Crimson Talon. She could see other human craft around her, some succeeding in their approaches, most dying in fire and silence. But still, they came wave after wave because humans did not know how to stop. Commander Vexter felt his flagship shudder as boarding craft began breaching the hull. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as human soldiers poured into the corridors, fighting with stolen weapons and savage determination he had planned for. Boarding actions had prepared defenses against such tactics, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of fighting humans in close quarters. They did not retreat when wounded. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought with a ferocity that made his veteran warriors hesitate, and hesitation in combat was death.